as I said, we're going to be in Isaiah. So if you're not there, if you could turn to Isaiah chapter 15, we'll begin reading there shortly. And as we go throughout the text here, we'll look at it, and I'll kind of keep this map up. I have this and just another one, but we'll see a couple of cities that will, we'll kind of pass by as we do read. So keep in mind of these, and don't mind the letters. I mean, not the letters, but the lines there. That's for another thing. But just keep in mind these things here. Before we get started, do you remember last class, who were we talking about? Now, we talked about Assyria, we talked about Babylon, and I mean, if you're in Isaiah 15, you'll kind of see the previous city, if you will, or state or region that we talked about. Who was that? Philistia. And so this was, before we get into chapter 15, we talked about the judgment on Philistia and what was going to happen to them at this point, that they were trying to rejoice because there was going to be a new king that was going to take the throne. And we talked about that was fulfilled in Hezekiah coming. Hezekiah started out at 25 years old, and so Philistia is rejoicing that this young king is coming through, to the throne. And they're rejoicing, but again, it shows there that, the judgment is, hey, don't rejoice. Because this king, Hezekiah, he's a righteous king. He's going to do all of these good things. And as we read in Hezekiah's account, it will say how he even conquered, well, not conquered, but he pushed back Philistia, and he destroyed a lot of the people there. And so that was kind of a fulfillment concerning that. But now, as I said, we're going to be looking at Moab, judgment on Moab. So we're going to go ahead and read verses 1 through 9. The oracle concerning Moab. Surely in the night Ar of Moab is devastated and ruined. Surely in the night Ker of Moab is devastated and ruined. They have gone up to the temple to Dibon, even to the high places to weep. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. Everyone's head is bald and every beard is cut off. In their streets they have girded themselves with sackcloth. On their housetops and in their squares everyone is wailing, dissolving in tears. Heshbon and Elileh also cry out. Their voice is heard all the way to Jahaz. Therefore the armed men of Moab cry aloud. His soul trembles within him. My heart cries out for Moab. His fugitives are as far as Zor and Eglath Shelishiyah. They go up to the accent of Lahith, weeping. Surely on the road to Horonaim they raise a cry of distress over their ruin, for the waters of Nimrim are desolate. Surely the grass is withered, the tender grass died out. There is no green thing. Verse 7, therefore the abundance which they have acquired and stored up they carry off over the brook of Arabim. For the cry of distress has gone around the territory of Moab. Its wail goes as far as Eglaim, and its wailing even to Beeralim. For the waters of Dimon are full of blood. Surely I will bring added woes upon Dimon, a lion upon the fugitives of Moab and upon the remnant of the land. And so that's well, we'll kind of stop and look at a couple of things here. Concerning Moab, do we know the origin of where Moab would have came from? Does Moab ring any bells of how, kind of he, I guess, was kind of born? I guess I kind of could have worded that better, but. Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Steve.
I was just
Yeah. So, of course. And so if you go back to Genesis chapter 19, you'll see the part of where Lot comes into play. In Genesis chapter 19, beginning in verse 34, all the way through verse 37, we find that the daughters of Lot, that they would come up with this idea of, laying with their father to keep their family lineage going. And so they will get him intoxicated, and then they'll have these two kids. I believe the older one, forgot his name, but the younger one was Moab. And so that's how we kind of see this idea of Moab coming into play. And even as Moab is being started out, it's not good, obviously. You know, it was treachery, it was sneakiness that had to come to play in order for Moab to come about. So we already see that this is not a good time here. But also, going down the line of what we know as being the Moabites, we see that the Israelites and the Moabites, they're not that good. They're not buddy with each other, if you will. We'll see in Numbers chapter 22, there's this part of where there's this attempting curse from Moab. And in Numbers chapter 22, we'll have this man by the name of Balak, which would have been king of Moab at that time. And so Balak, king of Moab, he would try to convince Balaam, a prophet, to curse the Israelites. I believe it was because he said that the Israelites, they have grown mighty, they have grown strong, and, you know, the Moabites are scared of that. And so, you know, they're wanting the Israelites to be cursed. And so Balak, king of Moab, would try to convince Balaam, the prophet, to curse the Israelites. But of course, that won't come to pass there. But that was in Numbers chapter 22, verse 1 through 6. And because of this event that is taking place, because of that, well, the Moabites weren't even allowed to enter into the congregation of the Lord because of this attempting cursing and all the dealings that they had with Israel. And you'll find that in Deuteronomy chapter 23, beginning of verse 3. It will say, an Ammonite, and that was the first son actually, an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever, because they met you not with bread and with water in the way, when you came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Beor of Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse thee. And of course, it will go on to say, nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam. So Israelites, they weren't going to be cursed. But we see that Moab would have been punished because of this, you know, that they wanted to do harm to God's people. And so that's just, you know, a couple of instances there. We have some in Judges chapter 3, where Eglon, king of Moab, would have ruled over the Israelites because of their disobedience. And so again, the relationship between the Moabites and the Israelites is not good. And now we see concerning Moab that they are up for judgment because they harmed God's people, and also they rebelled against God. And as we say that the Moabites, they were, you know, they were cousins. And so even then, concerning the Israelites being God's people, well, God also did care about the Moabites. You know, they did come from the line that would have, well, they didn't come from the line that Abraham came from, but again, they were relatives. And so even as we read in chapter 15, we'll see that there's care even for Moab as they're going through this destruction. And as we read these other nations here and what happens to them, we'll see one really big thing that is motivated by their judgment that is to take place. That all of Israel's enemies is that, well, they had a boastful spirit about themselves. And they, of course, will be brought low. You know, again, we talked about Babylon. We talked about Assyria. We talked about Philistia. And, you know, it will go on to even Moab, Damascus, Egypt, and Tyre, which we'll talk about in later classes. But again, we're talking about Moab and the things that will come about for them. But looking at these oracles here, that this was an oracle by Isaiah, that these oracles confirm that God has control over all nations and not simply just Israel. And so even as this judgment is going to take place, again, God is in control. And so, of course, after threatening Philistia, we see that Israel's nearest enemy was upon the west. Well, now Isaiah is turning toward the east, and Moab would have been across the Jordan River. And he's going to talk about the judgment that is to take place on Moab. And so what we see in chapters 15 and 16 will be a show of destruction. It will be mourning and also flight of the inhabitants, that they're, in a sense, trying to escape from this peril that is to take place. And so we'll see those three things that do take place. Looking at verse 1, and I'll read it again. It says, the oracle concerning Moab. Surely in the night Ar of Moab is devastated and ruined. Surely in the night Ker of Moab is devastated and ruined. And notice that it's a repetition there, that it's said 2 times. That's to really put an emphasis on what is going to take place. That these 2 cities here are really going to be devastated. They're going to be ruined. And you look at the first city there, Ar, the meaning in Hebrew would literally mean just the city. And so there's kind of 2 ways that people, that scholars have kind of looked at this, that this may be talking about an actual city that we don't know the actual location of. And you can see the reference on the map here, that some people think it's Aroer right here. But again, if you look at the actual Hebrew word, it does say that Or was, all it meant was a city. And so it's just talking about a city, and this would have been the main city of Moab. And so you look at this being the stronghold that the Moabites, they're really relying on this city for all of their resources, pretty much, that this city is going to be devastated. This city is going to be ruined. And then, of course, you look at Ker. Usually this is also identified as Ker of Moab. And this is actually what you'll see on the map here, Ker Hareseth. And so this one, we actually know that it's right there. But also this city will be in ruin. This city will be devastated. And Ker, we look at that word there in the Hebrew, it would be the same meaning as a fortress. And so as we talked about Or, that it means a city, really a main city of Moab, well, Ker, or Ker Hareseth, this was also looked at as being a fortress. And so both the main city and the fortress of Moab, well, they're going to be devastated. There's going to be ruin there. And so that's kind of a place to look at, well, God is going to tear down the stronghold of Moab. It's going to be all this judgment that is to take place. And so I had a question here. As the destruction is taking place, do you think that the Moabites, you think they're going to run back to God? And as I say that, people may say, well, they don't know who Jehovah God is. Again, they had dealings with the Israelites many times. And even it gets to a point of where the Israelites, they mingle with some of the Moabites, back in the scriptures there. And so it is really safe to say that the Moabites would have had some idea who Jehovah God was. And so, and the question was, well, you think they would, after all this destruction that is going to take place, do you think that they would at least consider Jehovah God, consider running to him and praying to him? You think that, they would consider that? Or? Yeah. Well, they did. They had an example from the Israelites, although, it probably could have been a better example. But the record, what we do see is them not running to God, but rather they're weeping. And we'll look at that actually in verse 2. After this devastation is to take place, they're not going to run to God. They're not going to weep to God. But it says they have gone up to the temple and to Dibon, even to the high places to weep. when we look at that word high places, do we know what that's in a way in reference to? In the temple? I heard something else. Place of worship. And usually with these high places, who would be the one that they would usually worship? Would it be Jehovah God? It would not be Jehovah God. You know, this was an actual Canaanite practice that they would go onto these high places and they would worship their gods. And you look at Moab particularly, well, the lowercase g, God of Moab would have been the god of Chemosh. And we find that in scripture there, that they would have went and they would have wept. They would have went to Chemosh instead of running to Jehovah God. And so they're crying to Chemosh, and of course Chemosh is not going to deliver them because Chemosh is a false idol. It's not a real God. So we do see that there. That no, they don't. But most likely they're there offering Chemosh their cries, their weeps for Chemosh to help them, but there's going to be no help there. You look in verse 2. And I guess we just went over that. But also looking at the latter part, it says Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. Everyone's head is bald and every beard is cut off. And, you know, I've been back and forth with this, that, you know, Nebo's right up there. And so, you know, some people say, well, this is a city, and others, you know, think that this is a part of Mount Nebo. And, you know, where Moses would have looked over into the promised land, and God says, hey, you can look over to the promised land, but you can't enter in. And so that would have been, as we know, in Mount Nebo. And so there's back and forth of whether Nebo is a city or Nebo is the place where Moses would have looked over. Nevertheless, we understand that Moab is mourning here. And so it says concerning this judgment that is to take place that it will happen in a night. Surely in a night, Ar of Moab is devastated and ruined. Surely in the night, Ker of Moab is devastated and ruined. The whole city was destroyed in a night. You know, and I don't know exactly how many people would have been here, but I mean, again, just in one night that took place. And so that kind of even reminds me of, you know, what we talk about Jesus. You know, that he's coming like a thief in the night. You know, that it will be quick. It will be quick. It will be a swift destruction. You know, and we don't know when that is to take place. We don't know if it's actually going to be at night, but we just know that we don't know exactly when he's coming, but he is coming. And so we need to be ready. But that's just kind of something I thought back to concerning a thief in the night, if you will. But in the night, these cities, they would be destroyed. So they, you know, judgment on Moab, it's quick work. You know, nothing delayed there. No, this is going to happen very quickly. And so as this happened again, that they're not coming to weep to God. You know, they're going to their God, Chemosh, and they're weeping to their God and hoping that they will be saved by him. But of course, that will not be the case. And so what we see dropping down in verse 5, and actually looking at verse 4 in the latter part, notice where it says, therefore the armed men of Moab cry aloud. You ever seen a soldier? I mean, a soldier is usually one not to be looked at as crying. You know, and there are cases where, you know, something has happened and, you know, I mean, tears are okay. But usually, you know, you look at soldiers that, oh, man, they're all strong and everything. You know, you don't cry. But here, you know, even the armed men, they're crying aloud because of this destruction that is taking place. This is something that is really, really terrible. So bad to the point in verse 5, my heart cries out for Moab. Again, this is also back and forth to whether this is talking about God crying out or actually Isaiah crying out, because God is using Isaiah to deliver this prophecy. Nevertheless, either or, you know, there's sorrow there, and I believe I lean more towards it even being God, and I can say it can even be both. But the fact that God cares even for Moab here, that's pretty interesting. Again, you know, Moab is related to Abraham. You know, that would have been they would have had a relation there, and so God even cares for the enemy of Israel. So that is also pretty interesting if you look at that. It says his fugitives are as far as Zoar in Eglath Shelishiyah. It's a big one there, but that word Zoar, that city rather, Zoar. And again, you'll look at this. You can find this on. Actually, I have this on the next map here. Yeah, so Zoar is right there. Now, what's significant about Zoar? Have we heard of that city before? Where at? Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's also really interesting too, because Lot, you know, the Moabites, they're descendants of Lot, you know, descendants of Lot's daughters. And, you know, it was told Lot came up with it. You know, they told him to go, you know, to this other place, but he says, hey, can I go to Zoar, you know, for refuge? And so the angels permit even Lot to go to Zoar there. And so he finds refuge in Zoar, but it won't really be the same for Lot's descendants. You know, as they're making their way there, we find that there's more sorrow to be had, that they're crying pretty much all the way, really all the way till they get to the place of where, you know, that they'll kind of take refuge at. It says that his fugitives, this idea of them running, you know, trying to run away from this destruction that is to take place, they're running away as fugitives. And while they're doing this, again, they're just weeping. You know, going to verse 5, for they go up to the accent of Luhith, weeping. Surely on the road to Horonaim, they raise a cry of distress over their ruin. For the waters of Nimrim are desolate. And so again, they're trying to make their way to safety here. But even as, you know, they're trying to seek refuge, they just find more sorrow. It says that, you know, the waters of Nimrim are desolate. The grass is withered. The tender grass died out. You know, they say grass is greener on the other side. We just gotta keep going till we get there. Grass isn't greener on the other side. You know, they're still seeing sorrow. There is no green thing. Therefore, the abundance which they have acquired and stored up, they carry off over the brook of Arabim. For the cry, again, they're crying, for the cry of distress has gone around the territory of Moab. Its wail goes as far as Eglaim, and its wailing even to Beerlim. For the diamond are full of blood. The idea of blood there, and this diamond, that would have been the same. That's the same Hebrew word as, I believe it was, diamond right there. And it's also on this map too. But that's the same Hebrew word, diamond and diamond. They're interchangeably the same thing. But after that destruction would have taken place, you know, there's just blood everywhere. You know, there's destruction that has taken place, and it's just, you know, it's not a pretty sight at all. And it's just so bad, again, to where, you know, if you want to say that it was God or whether you want to say it was Isaiah, either or both. He says, even my heart cries out for Moab as they see this destruction takes place. So again, it's not a good time. And it says, even then, surely I will bring added woes upon Diamond, a lion upon the fugitives of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. Even as talking about a remnant that will escape, there's a lion that's going to be coming, even for them. It's a very opposite, actually, of what we have read for Israel's account. You know, if you turn back to Isaiah chapter 9, where is it? Actually, no, Isaiah chapter 11. It talks about this peace after Israel is going through their judgment, their judgment. They will say in Isaiah chapter 11, let's start with verse 7. Also the cow, actually no, it's verse 6. And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them. And so you see all these, people and animals, they're not supposed to be together, in a sense that there's not going to be peace there. One's probably going to eat the other, and whatever the case may be. That's not natural as from what we see. But in Israel's case, that remnant, well, there's going to be peace. But it won't be the same for Moab. Even as this remnant has escaped here, it says back in chapter 15, surely I will bring added woes upon Diamond, a lion upon the fugitives of Moab and upon the remnant of the land. So we see that with Moab, it's not looking good for them at all. Any questions or comments? And concerning this destruction here, some argue that this points to destruction of Moab by Nebuchadnezzar, which would have been the king of Babylon. We see in chapter 48 of Jeremiah, verse 1, and also in Isaiah chapter 16, verse 14, which we'll read shortly here, that it kind of does point to where we see that this may be Nebuchadnezzar's dealing, that Nebuchadnezzar was the one to destroy Moab to the point of where it's not a pretty sight to look at. And so some say it's by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. Some think that this was accomplished before the times of Nebuchadnezzar, either by the king of Assyria, and then others think that this was some other bandit here. But nevertheless, either or, that Moab is going to, there's going to be judgment there. Yes, and that is key too. That again, God is the one in control, and He's punishing Moab. And so yes, and I appreciate that. Yes, this is all actually done by God. God is letting this take place. That judgment needs to happen here. Yeah. Well, yeah, and we know even after they're used, that they're going to receive their punishment as well. If we're talking about Babylon, that Babylon is being used to destroy or harm another nation, well, Babylon's going to get the judgment as well. So, but yes, God is the one in control, and He is in control. Oh, that's good. Chapter 16. Send the tribute lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah by way of the wilderness to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. Then, like fleeing birds or scattered nestlings, the daughters of Moab will be at the fords of the Arnon. And so here we see that there's prophecy concerning Moab and what they are to do to receive safety, to have that safety there. Yes, God has said that there's going to be punishment, there's going to be judgment. But He also reaches out His hand as well. And He's telling Moab actually what they need to do for safety. Again, send the tribute lamb to the ruler of the land. Well, who at this time would have been ruler of the land? And in a sense, the time here, Judah would have been the ruler of the land. And so it says, send tribute to the lamb. And this is something that Moab would have done. You find this in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 4 and 5. That Meshach, king of Moab, he was a sheep breeder. And he used to pay the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. It says, but when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. And so this rebellion has been taking place, but, Now Moab needs, if they ever want safety, then they need to rely on Judah here. And of course, this will actually be prophecy to, Judah, to Jesus. At the line of Judah, Jesus is going to come. And not only the Moabites, but all the nations will have that safety in Jesus. And so even here is a prophecy. And there's so many prophecies in Isaiah about Jesus, the coming Messiah, and the safety that we can have in him. And so in the midst of this devastation that is coming on Moab, again, protection was to be found in Israel. We see that the Moabites, they have now fled all the way to strongholds in Edom, such as Selah. So they didn't end up wanting to rely on Jehovah God and to flee there. And we'll actually read that. So continuing in verse 3, give us advice, make a decision, cast your shadow like night at high noon. And this is actually Jehovah God through his prophet Isaiah talking to the Israelites at this point. He's telling them, hide the outcast, do not betray the fugitive. The fugitive is Moab. And so he's telling Israel to, take Moab in. Let the outcast, verse 4, let the outcast of Moab stay with you. Be a hiding place to them from the destroyer. For the extortioner has come to an end. Destruction has ceased. Oppressors have completely disappeared from the land. A throne will even be established in loving kindness, and a judge will sit on it faithfulness in the tent of David. Moreover, he will seek justice and be prompt in righteousness. So again, if they are to want safety at all, then they need to rely on this prophecy here concerning concerning Israel and them wanting to help Moab out. Of course, we see that this is always something that God has wanted for his people. He says, look, I have showed you mercy. You show mercy to others. You love others. And so even here as Moab is appeared as being a fugitive, he says, hey, hide the outcast. Do not betray the fugitive. He's saying to help them. But you look in verse 6 that there's not really, that Moab doesn't want, to be helped. And in verse 6, this is kind of looked at as the perspective of the Israelites. That they're saying, we have heard of the pride of Moab, an excessive pride, even of his arrogance, pride and fury, his idle boast are false. And so he says that they're really prideful, and to the point that they don't even want to seek refuge in Judah here. And so in verse 7 is, therefore Moab will wail, every one of Moab will wail. You will moan for the raisin cakes of Kir-Hareseth as those who are utterly stricken. For the fields of Heshbon have withered, the vines of Sibmah as well. The Lord of the nations have trampled down its choice clusters, which reached as far as Jazer and wandered to the deserts. Its tendrils spread themselves out and passed over the sea. Therefore I will weep bitterly for Jazer, for the vine of Sibmah. And you see again this idea of God even weeping for Moab, for how bad this judgment is going to be for them. That even God is here weeping. It says, therefore I will weep bitterly for Jazer, for the vine of Sibmah. I will drench you with my tears, O Heshbon and Elele. For the shouting over your summer fruits and your harvest has fallen away. Gladness and joy are taken away from the fruitful field. In the vineyards also there will be no cries or joy or jubilant shouting. No treader treads out wine in the presses, for I have made the shouting to cease. Therefore my heart intones like a harp for Moab, and my inward feelings for Kir-Hareseth. So it will come about when Moab presents himself, when he rearies himself upon his high place. Again, that's not, where God is. That Moab is seeking refuge for Moab's, lowercase g, God, Chemosh, And when he wearies himself upon his high place and comes to his sanctuary to pray, that he will not prevail. Again, God is saying, you're not coming to me. You're not coming to the one who can help you, to the only one true living God that can turn your situation around. But instead, Moab is going to their God. So he says in verse 13, this is the word which the Lord spoke earlier concerning Moab. But now the Lord speaks, saying, within 3 years, as a hired man would count them, the glory of Moab will be degraded, along with all his great population, and his remnant will be very small and impotent. Again, Moab is not wanting to rely on God. Even after all of this destruction, Moab refuses to turn to Yahweh, even though it had several interactions with Israel's God. Again, Moab would have had some knowledge of who the true God was. They had all these times where they would have been with Israel, although they didn't have good altercations. But the Moabites would have known who God was. They just didn't care to try to learn more about him. Instead, they wanted to serve their own God. That Moab's wealth and prosperity had made the people proud and blind to the true God. Because of their rejection of Yahweh and their excessive pride and arrogance, punishment and consequence, shame are on their horizon, much closer than they would think. They would soon feel the shame and punishment that comes with choosing the wrong God. So again, it's prophecy about Moab, and I think I may talk a little bit more about it. No, that's about it for that one. But so we see it, just all these other nations, even then, they're going to receive their judgment. Going back to what was said earlier, God is the one in control, and he is using these people as instruments, and I think it was saying with Babylon, instruments of indignation, and that they're going to be punished even after that. Again, God is the one in control. Judgment is going to fall on Moab. They had a chance to seek God, but instead they chose to do their own thing and seek after their own gods and worship in their high places. So, of course, there is punishment for that. That's all I have for that. Any questions or comments? Steve?
It's interesting, but Amos, contemporary with Isaiah,
Mm-hmm.
he makes kind of a condensed form of what's going to happen to Moab. And it would have been pretty much the same time, as I said, the contemporaries. So I don't know if Amos would have known Isaiah or not. But his prophecy on Moab, if you read it, it's just in Amos 2. Just a few verses there, but sounds like the very same as Isaiah's, only just brief.
Yeah.
All going to be destroyed.
Oh yeah, I had some notes here somewhere, even concerning Jeremiah. That we was reading one part, and I read in the book of Jeremiah, and they line up, and I think it was Jeremiah 48, but like pretty much they were the same words, and so Isaiah was, I believe, the 8th century, around the 8th century time that he would have been alive, and Jeremiah would have been the 6th century. And so even throughout this span of time, their words even line up. And so, and the point there was that even that all of these things will come to pass, and that these words are lined up exactly. It's just the work of the Holy Spirit. It wasn't man alone that would have done this, to a T. And even Amos, I'm not exactly sure if Amos was in Isaiah's time. He may have been, but nonetheless, we know that the author is God. So, no, that's good. That's good. Any other questions or comments? All righty. Thank you all for your time. I think we'll have a invitation a little bit after, and then we'll be closing out.